Spin-off games within the Final Fantasy series are interesting to say the least. Some of them serve as prequels and sequels to mainline titles, whereas some decide to build up a completely new franchise under the Final Fantasy name, or in some cases drop the name entirely. These range from absolute shit, decent, a comfortable ride, and in my opinion at least, very solid fun games. Then there's something which sits above this podium of best and worst, being heralded as one of the greatest spin-off Final Fantasy games by many, and in some people's eyes, something which even eclipses a lot of the mainline titles. This game is Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, Tactics is a game I picked up in my late teenage years due to the original release never coming out in Europe, only to come out in 2007 on the PSP, being retitled to Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions. It was love at first sight, and despite the slowdown which occurs when you use any ability or technique that can only be fixed using a fan-made patch, causing stress to erupt from my brain like a mental hernia, I can still look past that and appreciate the game for what it is. Yasumi Matsuno's masterpiece. The game is an SRPG, where you strategically place your units on squares within the map, unleash the fucking beast, and ultimately leave victorious or lose miserably. The latter is something which Tactics was not afraid to hand out to you on regular intervals. What gripped me more than the gameplay though was the story. It somehow made politics interesting to me, and seeing the hero Ramza go from a well-respected member of a noble household to a heretic opposing the church and its values was fucking fascinating to me. Giving Final Fantasy a story which treated everything with a level of seriousness I rarely see in a franchise like this, and including strong adult themes which I'd never once think I'd see in a Final Fantasy game. It's no wonder I sunk as many hours into it as I did. Now, as you can tell by the title of this video, Tactics will not be the main focus. However, it's 100% necessary to explain to the uninitiated why this game was so beloved within the community. And so, hitting a cult classic status, it wouldn't be a shock to hear that this game had a sequel. Only I use the term sequel about as loose as me after a couple of White Russians and a Malibu and Coke. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is an odd little specimen right out of the gate, because it isn't really a sequel to Tactics at all, even a prequel. It's more of a spin-off of a spin-off, and would land itself being exclusively on Nintendo consoles, specifically the Game Boy Advance, and later as a downloadable title on the world's most expensive dust collector.
Ironic.
So with the question, why does this game need defending in the first place, lingering in the air, let's get right to it. Keeping in mind everything I said about Tactics, how it wove fantasy politics seamlessly into its world building, was mature and dealt with terrible adult situations, with a level of maturity you'd expect given the topic in question, only then to hear about another Tactics game and presumably expecting something which was, you know, this with a few tweaks to make it accessible for the early 2000 handheld consoles, right?
All the humanity and all the fans screaming around it. I don't talk to people whose friends are out there.
Tactics Advance starts the game off with a snowball fight, set in the fictional countryside town of St. Ivalice on the planet Earth. Well, this is different. Where's Ramza? Now, understandably, I can empathise with the gut-wrenching feeling of worry, dread, or even disappointment that a lot of fans of Tactics felt back in the day, when they booted up this game and the first piece of drama they encounter is schoolyard bullying over a little boy's teddy bear. This is really why I'll be defending this title, because I'll agree with what a lot of people were telling me on Twitter. Really? People dislike this game? In my experience, fans of the original Tactics game dislike this specific title, and because of this, a slow drip effect of hatred has spread out over the internet, putting people off from ever considering picking up this title because it's for babies. But you know, babies, they also like the human breast, and I don't hear many complaints about those. The main reason I see people actively disliking this title is simply because they have dumbed down the Tactics brand in order to be more accessible for children. Now, whilst I agree with this statement, I do not subscribe to the idea that just because this game was created to allow younger children to be introduced and fall in love with the SRPG genre like I was, when my lovely parents were actually able to afford me a Game Boy Advance. I see a lot of people throwing a game which treats children with respect with its themes to the side, to point to an image of the main character's terrible fashion sense and go, see? Game is bad because character look bad. I see a lot of people ignoring the fact that this game was the inevitable catalyst for future games in the series, giving birth to some beloved Evil East mainstays simply because the judge system is fucking garbage. And it is! I'm not disagreeing with you there, the judge system is total shit. But what I'm going to try and do today is try to show you why this game, despite its flaws, deserves more respect than it currently receives. Starting with the story. Not long after a slow pan down onto a snowy schoolyard and the initial introduction of the bullies, the game introduces us to a pink-haired girl called Ritz who stands up for the boys being targeted, demonstrating her strong protective nature. The boy being bullied is Mute, someone who is apparently still grieving over the loss of his deceased mother, a teddy bear she gave to him usually always by his side. And finally, we see the main character March, the new kid in town. Automatically, the tonal shift from the first game is apparent, but it's done in a way which brings us comfortably into the realms of real-world problems rather than hardcore fantasy politics. Mute is being bullied. This opening tutorial is fantastic at showing this, as all of the bullies will only focus their attacks on him, eventually ending when one of them hides a rock in a snowball, causing his head to bleed. March, being the new kid, is already being ostracized by the other children, and Ritz serves as the strong adhesive to stick the group together. Not long after the three strike a friendship, March invites them over to his place to read a strange book that Mute wants to rent from a library, and along the way they bump into Mute's dad, named Sid. Sid is implied to be an alcoholic after his wife passed away, and Mute is visibly saddened or disappointed by his old man when he sees him being grilled by work colleagues. So, we haven't even properly started the game yet, but we're already being hit by a lot of real-world issues that children and adults can understand. Being bullied, the loss of a loved one, somebody we love going down a wayward path. March is even confirmed to have a father who has either passed away or no longer sees them, which in turn links him directly with Mute's future motivations, and gives March a level of empathy towards Mute's eventual goals. But this game is for babies! Goo goo gaga, you fucking cunt! We're then introduced to Doned, March's little brother, who's been assigned to a wheelchair due to an unexplained illness. The gang gather around the mysterious book, but find it's written in a strange language. Mute reads out the incantation and they begin talking about what types of games they all enjoy. Mute shares the information that he really loves Final Fantasy. Before Doned is asked to take his medicine, he turns somberly towards the window, saying how he wishes he can use magic. As night falls on the snowy countryside town of St. Ivalice, the book begins to open, turning this quiet town into the desert country of Ivalice from Final Fantasy Tactics. The residents get changed into entirely new races with entirely new memories, and March and his little brother are transported out of their comfy beds to a mysterious new world. For some reason, their memories have remained intact. Almost immediately, however, March bumps into a couple of Bangar and decides to accidentally drop the worst racist slur you could ever call them, causing him to be saved by a new friend that'll join him throughout his adventures, Mont Blanc the Moogle. The conversation after boils down to, hey listen man, you can't go around calling Bangar lizards, okay? It's not cool. Now I understand my lizard. And after a little while, March comes to a realization. He's been transported into the video game Final Fantasy Tactics. This is why Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is so interesting, because the Ivalice these characters are inhabiting is within the game and not the sequel Tactics Advance A2, we'll fucking get to that one day, is an Ivalice that has been created from the mind and desires of the young Mute Randall. And apparently one of the new additions to Ivalice that are conjured out of Mute's minds were bunny butts. I need to take a moment to put my hands together and thank our Lord and Saviour Mute Randall for this wonderful gift. I always wonder what it would be like if Mute was all, my favourite is Hyperdimension Neptunia.
Stop, for the love of all that is holy.
It is a fantasy world within a fantasy world, having a playful take on the isekai genre which would later become much more popular within Japanese animation, meaning being transported to another world. This makes March's goal to go back home all the more gut-wrenching for him, and especially for the person behind the Game Boy Advance controlling him. When I was little, I couldn't comprehend defend March's decision to want to return home. You're living in a video game, you can use magic, you can fight monsters. And as a little boy who wanted nothing more than to disassociate himself with the real world, this looked like paradise. I didn't like March, and I didn't like his motivations, but as a 25-year-old man who's had time to mature,
Guess I had no choice.
Oh, he teleported behind him! He teleported behind him!
I can definitively say that March was right. If anyone over the age of 16 still believes that March was wrong, then please listen to what I'm about to say and absorb it. In the universe that Tactics Advance creates, again, we're not bringing up Advance 2, everything that is happening within this Ivalice is an illusion. It's fantasy. None of this is real. Plain and simple. The book has created a world where Mute can truly be happy, where his mother is alive. He's the prince of a country and can order anyone to do what he wants. And his dad is employed as the leader of the judges, no longer the sad, depressive figure Mute saw him as in the real world. However, Mute's mother is not actually there. It's a fake. Again, none of this is real. A lot of people seem to neglect the fact that March has a mother who he loves back in the countryside town of St. Ivalice, or has been turned into someone else entirely with their memories erased. March will never get to see his mother again. He'll never get to see his extended family again. This is ripping a little boy away from the only parental figure he had. But people label this kid as the villain despite that? And March realizes very early on that living in this world is escapism. People are literally choosing to run away to this fantasy world where they can ignore their problems and pretend like they never existed in the first place. He's living in a dream that sprouted from Mute's imagination, and he needs to go home. Challenges obviously step in the way of this, the first biggest issue being Mute himself, who realizes that March is actively trying to tear his dream down in front of his eyes, and wants the judges to imprison March for his crimes. Please also keep in mind here that Mute's bullies were transformed into flesh-eating zombies. This is not a world I can actively defend. Yes, the children were horrible, but even speaking as a child who was bullied in real life, though to be honest I did put myself up on a podium that screamed "kick me," punishing these kids for bullying by turning them into a mindless zombie, without giving them a chance to grow up and realise that what they did was actually a very nasty thing, is not something I want to applaud. Can't mention Mute and not bring up his bodyguard that appears halfway through the game called Lednar Twem. I'll give you 3 seconds to figure out what that spells backwards. Oh my god, Tom Riddle was Voldemort the whole time? Lednar is the physical representation of Mute's dark side, perhaps a version of Mute he wishes he can become, someone who is powerful enough to put an end to March, trying to drag him out of his dream world. Lednar's inclusion is so interesting because we get to see a more confident, if not ruthless version of Mute's inner thoughts, becoming a near unstoppable force for March and his friends. Then there's Barbas, a character popularly believed to be Mute's conscience in the form of a new Mo, though his strange physical characteristics could also be drawn to Mute's teddy bear. Initially starting off as extremely protective of Mute, he eventually becomes desperate to translate what his prince's innermost thoughts truly are, and whether or not Mute is using this world to run away. Barbas will eventually side with March, believing that it is indeed better to tackle your problems head on rather than run away and hide in make-believe. And if somebody this closely connected and created specifically for Mute turns on him for his own good, then how can I possibly defend his actions? The other more questionable barrier that gets in his way is Ritz, at one point getting frustrated at March for wanting to go home and sends him away with the knowledge that if things continue, she'll turn him in for his crimes as well, forcing him to leave feeling like all of his friends from the other world have completely abandoned him. Her reasoning for not wanting to go home is because her pink hair isn't natural. In the real world, it's pure white, and she's very self-conscious about this. Her mother tended to cry whenever she reached for the bottle of dye, presumably because she was upset her daughter was so miserable at her appearance. Ritz even tells us that she'd rather live here than ever have to face her mother again because of this. Even her Viera friend asks her this question like, "Really bitch? Your parents are in the other world, you realise this, right?" Ritz Blitz's innocently naive response to whether or not she needs her parents is something that kids will tend to do. I mean, I remember being younger with my friends and talking about how cool the world would be without adults. And it probably would be cool, for a few months or so. Eventually, I'd become distraught when I realised I was sent there with one set of clothes and I couldn't figure out how to work the fucking washing machine. Like, what is this bullshit? Advanced algebra? Mom? The biggest obstacle that I actually have a really hard time with is March's brother, Doned, who back in the real world was disabled from the waist down. In this world, he can walk on 2 legs. And whether or not he's doing this in a dreamlike state or not doesn't really matter in this case. The fact is, this kid can walk again, and March turning the world back to what it was must be the most horrible, heartbreaking thing for him to do because it will mean taking away the freedom that his little brother has received. But there's a genuinely touching scene where the 2 brothers finally have a chance to talk face to face, without Doned trying to get his older brother arrested.
This is what they call a heartwarming family reunion, eh?
Where after being accused of having everything back in the real world, March gives us a great look into the kind of kid he is back on Earth. He was a child who never put himself first. The way he words it here, it seems like he felt he never could put himself first because of his brother's illness. Everything revolved around Doned, which was never something he judged his little brother for, but he didn't deny feeling jealous that his mother had to put a lot of her attention into Doned because of his illness, hardly having any time for him. And since they moved away from his father for unexplained reasons, he felt extremely alone. I love March as a character. Yes, you can post straw man memes of him, which admittedly are pretty funny, but putting the jokes aside, you can't just slam March as a villain because he wants to go back home, to the real world, and not a world that has been created, forged from the imagination of a schoolyard friend. And all of these reasons are, yet again, why the story of Tactics Advance shouldn't be shunned simply because it's slightly more accessible for children. Because the story is, in my opinion, really good. It throws so much stuff at you to make you question if what March is doing is right. Hell, it even makes him question it too. But the adventure of this kid trying to get back to reality is a delightfully mature story for children and adults. And I acknowledge the fact that if a previously dark franchise I like was toned down to allow in more of a younger audience,
this game is a mix of Devils May Cry action.
Goddamn, I'd probably be a little bit pissed off too. But if the story is concrete and doesn't mock your intelligence, if it doesn't hold you by the hand and shy away from topics that'll make a child think for themselves, I would probably learn to love or accept it in time. And honestly, that's really the biggest thing I need to defend here, because the actual game of Tactics Advance is really solid for a handheld title. It plays almost identically to Tactics, but removing the ability to turn the map due to making every enemy perfectly visible. There are over 36 different classes to choose from, and the addition of new races definitely adds a splash of colour and diversity, which was welcome for me. Unfortunately, it is tainted by the judge system, something I will not be defending within this video. The judge system is flawed. For every random encounter you experience, a judge will fart into existence and will have a select number of laws you'll need to obey within the match. Otherwise, it's a yellow card, then off to jail with you.
You can't keep getting away with it!
These rules can be absolute bullshit sometimes, having it so you can't attack beasts in a map filled with beasts, forcing you to walk around the map a few times to get rules which won't fuck you over. It isn't fun, and that's a shame. Why is he moving bodies around like he's decorating a fucking house? So really, all in all, Tactics Advance is a title which I love and will defend until my virtual knuckles are raw and bloody. Is it perfect? No, but is it the worst thing to happen? Absolutely not. What are you talking about? It gave birth to some truly amazing things which will become mainstays of the Ivalice universe. I adore the Bangar and Viera, especially the Viera. Don't judge me. And the Judge's redesign in Final Fantasy XII are fucking help! Help! My semen is escaping. Plus, there's a nice tactics-inspired raid going on in Final Fantasy XIV right now that serves as fan service to long-time admirers. And without Tactics Advance, a huge portion of these characters would be completely non-existent. Plus, this gives me a cheeky excuse to plug my character. She's fucking perfection, crafted in the lofty heights of heaven itself. Overall, the game definitely deserves more praise, or at least a second chance with longtime fans of Final Fantasy or even the Tactics brand. The story of a little boy who, despite everything, despite his friends turning their backs on him, wants to stop them from escaping their real-world issues with legitimate fantasy, and tackle their problems head-on, no matter how painful it is. And thanks to the ending, we know that this is something that they absolutely do. Hello, wow, golly, thanks for watching all the way to the end, hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe and hit the bell if you want to hear more of my voice and see more of my face, and share this video around so hopefully we can bring in more of an audience. Releasing 2 videos in a space of 1 month was surprisingly refreshing to do. Not only were they shorter than my Kingdom Hearts 2 video combined, but doing different topics meant the editing burnout was so much less, which was just great. I'll definitely do more of these in the future. I've also got another series being planned as we speak, so expect to hear more news about that as the year goes on. If you want to help me and the channel out, then goddamn is pledging to me on Patreon the best possible thing you could do. There's a tier list of rewards you can get a hold of, such as outtakes or even access to entire podcast episodes or snippets of my videos early. I also have a Twitch which can be found down below with all the rest of the links. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time.